and welcome to the Assist Community Conversation. My name is Elizabeth Sabet, and I'm the current board president of the American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences. I'm so glad that you found us and you found this webinar. This is a recording of a webinar that was originally recorded January 24th, 2019. And I hope that you will enjoy the conversation between these experiencers. And if you would like to get on our mailing list so that you could join future community conversations live, feel free to email me at info@assist.org. That's info@aciste.org.
Excited to welcome our panelists today. What's unique about our panelists who will be sharing their stories today is that they did not have any interface with the mental health system. And we realized after our last panel that everyone happened to have some experience with the mental health system. And we really wanted to make sure that everyone was represented, because certainly those people having spiritual experiences do not necessarily have to be going through the mental health system. So thanks for being with us. We're excited about our panel today, experiencers sharing their stories. And I'd like to begin by asking you to introduce yourself briefly. Let's begin with Michael.
Okay. Hello, my name is Michael Garbett. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I currently work in private practice as well as at a clinic with individuals who've suffered from trauma. I worked in the substance abuse field for about 5 years. And due to having my own spiritual emergence and crisis at the time, about 8 years ago, I am conducting research as a doctoral student on spiritual emergence with the hope of educating the social work field on the phenomena in order to hopefully provide better services for those who are looking for help in the future.
That's great. Thanks for being with us, Michael.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good to be here.
Okay, so our first question, we're going to ask you to share a little bit about your spiritually transformative experience and focusing in particular on what it was like for you to integrate, what your process was like. And, you know, with this panel specifically, we made sure that nobody here interfaced with the mental health system, because in our last panel on the same topic, it just so happened that people did. So we wanted to give people just really an understanding of the full range of experiences, and that they don't necessarily have to have anything to do with mental health and specifically seeking help in the system. So Michael, could you share a little bit about your journey of your experience and your integration process?
Sure. So I'd say in approximately 2010, I experienced what is written in the literature to be a Kundalini awakening. Prior to the awakening, I had been symptomatic. Along, and I think this is an important note, along with having been in a fair amount of, say, psychological turmoil, which had led me to practices of yoga, meditation, and I'd say fairly intense yoga and meditative practices, to the point where my body started becoming very sensitized. I could start feeling energy throughout my body, in my hands, in my feet. And I remember one evening I was doing some meditation in bed, and I could feel this really intense heat in my feet. And while I was sleeping, I had this sensation that I was falling into the bed. And I woke up terrified, very scared. You know, you just wake up because you have that sensation of falling. And I feel like a lot of people have had that sensation. But for some reason, when I woke up, my intuition told me that I should have fallen. I should have allowed myself to fall. That that there was nothing to be scared of. Essentially, it was just me that I was scared of. So the next night, I went back in bed and I continued doing some meditative practice and feeling the energies moving around my body. And again, my feet started to get extremely hot and the energy just kept building and building. And it was at that point that I felt energy from the base of my spine, as is described in a Kundalini awakening. I felt energy from the base of my spine move up my spine. I felt myself falling again, but this time I imploded. Essentially, I imploded, and I was just in this very vast space. And I felt my body being raised vertically, although I knew I was still in my bed. My body raised vertically, and I was just in this very vast space. And you know, it was an interesting experience. It felt that it had lasted only a couple of minutes, but yet when I came out of my meditation, about 5 or 6 hours had passed, and so that was the Kundalini awakening. I didn't know what it was at the time. I in all my years of practicing yoga and meditating, I had never heard of what a Kundalini awakening was. That being said, prior to the awakening, I had been experiencing interesting symptoms, kind of out-of-body symptoms, and definitely afterwards, these symptoms were exacerbated. So energy throughout my body, just a feeling of almost derealization. I could step through the floor at times, and the symptoms definitely became exacerbated. And so I did go try to find some help, not mental health help, but help in terms of I went to neurologists, I went to doctors to get full blood panels done, holistic therapists, just to try to figure out what was going on with me. And I was always in perfect health, physically, I was always in perfect health. And so, of course, time and time again, when medical practitioners couldn't figure out or understand what I was explaining to them, what was happening to me, ultimately it would always end up as being referred for mental health medication. And something in me told me that wasn't the answer. So it was definitely difficult. So I mean, talking about integration, not knowing what's going on, I think that can be the most difficult part of the spiritually transformative experience. Just not knowing what's going on. I mean, that's terrifying, and it's very anxiety provoking. I found when working with my clients, just educating them on what a spiritually transformative experience is, that's a huge part of the treatment. It relieves an extreme amount of anxiety. So somehow or another, I stumbled upon Kundalini awakening afterwards, and I started like, okay, that it seems like that's what happened to me. And then I was lucky enough to come across a book written by Gopi Krishna called Living with Kundalini. And that book for me literally was a lifesaver, because this was a man who wrote about his experience with having a Kundalini awakening. And so many of the things that he wrote about resonated with what I had been experiencing and what I was experiencing. So finally, I had some type of understanding, some type of language to understand and express what I was going through. And that was huge, because without that, I was stuck in my head and didn't know what was going on. When I think about integration, I think about two things. I think about integrating the process within myself, and then I think about integrating myself back into society. Because right after the experience, I was definitely blown out. It was shocking. Who could I speak to? I had no one to speak to. Who would understand what I was experiencing, what I was going through? If doctors couldn't understand what I was going through, then who could I talk to about it? So it was very isolating. It was a very isolating experience. And I realize now, when I look back, a big part of me integrating the experience within myself has been about me becoming comfortable with what I've experienced and being comfortable talking about it. And I think the integration continues with the research that I'm doing now as a doctoral student on spiritual emergence, spiritual awakening, and the difficulties experienced in that process, and being able to share with professionals and just meeting people who have similar interests, and realizing, wow, I'm not alone in this experience. Even as a professional, I'm not alone in this experience. And so the integration process continues through the research that I'm doing to try to educate the public on what a spiritual transformative experience looks like, and how help can be provided to those experiencing a spiritual transformative experience.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing, and thanks for your work in helping.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for being with us today. And Elizabeth Rose, thanks for joining us this morning. We're happy to have you. Elizabeth is a longtime ASSIST volunteer. She works answering our phones. And Elizabeth, please tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bramlett. I also go by the name Elizabeth Rose. Hi, Katrina. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I work for ASSIST, and I do some volunteer work with them on the forum and answering the phones. So I do have the pleasure of helping other experiencers integrate through their experience and supporting them in whatever way they feel is useful. And that has helped me in my integration a lot also. It's also helped me to process through parts of my experience. So my experience was, I believe, a Kundalini awakening. It came in 3 parts over about, I think, a 15-year period. The first part of my experience lasted 1 week. The second part of my experience lasted 1 month. And the third part of my experience lasted 17 months. The first, each time that I had an experience, I was taken into what I call the heaven state. I believe that I'm partially in my body and partially out of my body at the same time. So I'm able to connect with everything at a different level, bring in information about whatever is in front of me seems to be communicating with me, plants, animals, people at a different level. I'm bombarded with information that is constantly streaming into my awareness. It's very hard to focus on the physical world because there's so much information coming in at such a rapid pace. And that is the state that's, people often refer to it as blissful. I always felt that it was just normal. Every time I was in this state, I would think, this is so, and I would think I was going to say amazing or something, but the only word that ever came to my mind was normal. It just felt perfectly normal. And there's a deep connection with everything. There is a lot of people describe it as the unconditional love, which I describe a little differently. To me, it was just this pure acceptance, this pure knowledge. There was no thought, there was no emotion, absolutely no fear. It's complete safeness because everything is known, because of this information coming in all the time. If I would try to ask a question, so I would start to say, hey, but the second that I would even begin to say the first syllable of the first word of the question, the answer would be coming back at me. So it was such this rapid flow of information that any questions I had were just instantaneously, the answer was there. And I think that's one reason why it can take some time for people who've had these experiences to process through the information because of the rapid flow that it can come into us. So during each experience, I had made a choice to change my life, and I believe that's what triggered each one. And then I had taken the steps to make those changes. I also went to see a healer each time, some type of a healer. Once was a counselor, once I was doing Reiki and acupuncture, and once I went to see a energy healer. Every time I was instructed to take these very specific nutrients, sea salt, lemon juice, a basic protein powder that our body makes all the other proteins out of, a couple other things, and to sit in the sunlight. Each time I experienced a lot of physical healing. The first time I was really having problems eating. I was down to just only being able to eat a few bites at a time. I had gone to the doctors. They couldn't find anything wrong with my stomach. And after about 5 days of these nutrients in the sunlight, I noticed I was shoveling in food. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm eating. I couldn't believe it. It had been such a struggle for me to eat. And I was losing a lot of weight. So the second experience and the second and first experience, they both ended very pleasantly. I was given information. I came back and was excited to apply that information to my life. The second experience, I asked for it to end. It was going on for a month, and I was excited. I wanted to come back and apply what I had been told. The third experience, however, I was in this, what I call the heaven state, for 2 months, and then on and off again for 2 more months. At the end of that 2 months, I started to become a little concerned because it wasn't ending. And I wasn't able to really keep up with my daily duties because I was so distracted by this flow of information. When I realized that I was not in my body, I touched the top of my head and it was completely numb. So I started holding myself in on the top of my head, and it would kind of go on and off and on and off for about 2 more months. So at the end of this 4-month period, when I thought that the experience ended and I went through this process of coming back into my body also, I expected it to be pleasant like after the first 2, and it was not at all. I went into what I call my underworld. I went through 8 months of emotional purging, pretty much constant. I was told that my brain lobes had been disconnected and were going through a brain overlay process to reconnect. I went through pretty much every Kundalini symptom or characteristic that I have found in literature throughout this experience. I went through trance and ritual states. I went through the purging, automatic yoga type body movements. My cell memory was released, downloads, reprogramming of my subconscious. So when I went into this purging underworld, it was like I came back into my own underworld, but it was tied into the mass consciousness. And it all had to be undone basically to match. So if I step out of my body and I see what is real, what is really the truth about, say, myself, to simplify it, and then I come back into my old programming, it makes sense to me now that all that would have to be undone. I had to go through this process of undoing all of the mental illnesses that I had created to survive in this world. I didn't see myself as a mentally ill person at all, but I felt that I was a fairly functioning person. But comparatively to how I am now, it is absolutely completely different. It's a lot more of an authentic state. It's a lot more of who I truly am, connected to who I truly am, and I'm able to connect with everything else in a completely different way at a different point. So after the purging went on, and I started getting really scared, really scared it wouldn't stop. And I called my parents and I told my kids, something is wrong. This is not stopping. Something is wrong with me. And I called my old counselor who I had seen in the past. And I went in and I did see him for 2 sessions. And I was terrified to talk to him. And I sat cowering in my little chair and I said to him, he wanted to start taking notes. And I said, no, you can't write any of this down. And he said, why? And I said, because you're the enemy. You're the establishment. You're the devil himself. And he just laughed and put his pencil down. I did write down what I had been going through and I had him read it. I was afraid that I was bipolar type 2. And he said, there's a lot in there that could be bipolar, but there's a lot of stuff in there that's not bipolar. And he asked me if I wanted to continue sessions with him. And I said, no, I need to fly solo now. That's what my experience was all about. Was about becoming my own self, how to know who I am and how to manifest that in this world. So I felt I was lucky enough to have family support. And that's why I work with Assist, to support other people, because a lot of people don't. And a lot of people are terrified to go into the mental health system. But without support, I would not have made it. I would have been homeless. I had to end up quitting my job. My mom had to help me pay my bills for a couple of years because I couldn't work. When my experience ended, I was reborn. I went through a very physical rebirthing process, and I was reborn into absolutely nothing but terror. I was gone for so long that, and if any experiencers out there know, time is so different on the other side. So 17 months on the other side to me was literally like a lifetime. When I came back here, I had lost all memory of my previous lifetime in this body. I had lost all of my functioning in this world. I had to relearn simple things like time, gravity, balance, direction, the seasons. The things like that, I kind of could give myself a refresher course and relearn quickly, like 6 o'clock. I said, what's 6 o'clock? That means nothing to me. I had no reference points for it. And I said, oh yeah, 6 o'clock, that's when everybody eats dinner. And from that point, then I was able to remind myself of time and the clock. I picked up a stick and I started learning to balance a stick and flipping sticks and playing with like martial arts sticks to learn balance and gravity and physical laws like that. So I think the main part of the question is about the mental health system. I think that it's vital that the mental health professionals are trained properly, which is another big reason that I support Assist. And I was terrified to interact with them if I would need to, because I was afraid they would just medicate me, tell me I'm schizophrenic, take away all of the blessings that I was being taught, and tell me something was wrong with me. And when I came back and I had to relearn my entire life and put my entire life back together from square one, which by the way looks completely different now, it really matches who I am. A key point of that was understanding that there was nothing wrong with me. I had to get that thought out of my head because I had to get a new relationship with myself. My emotional and physical feedback systems were key in knowing who I am and how I function. And I had to build everything around that, everything around my self-care, my limits, keeping myself healthy, also creating a sense of safety in this world, getting my bills paid, having a decent income, all of those very realistic grounding things that we need to work on, that we need to understand. And I didn't want to go into the mental health system and have someone medicate me, first of all, because I knew that during the unraveling of the mental illnesses, if it would have stopped at any point during that, I would have been stuck there forever. And I knew that. And in that mental illness, that would have been the rest of my life. It had to unravel. I had to submit to the process and let this natural and intelligent healing process take over and do what it was doing for me. So I didn't want anybody to interfere with it. I trusted it, and I was told every step of the way what was going on, even though it was terrifying at points. I knew what was going on. I knew that it was good.
That's great, Elizabeth. Thank you. What a journey you were on, and to be able to recognize in all of that that there is this intelligent process, that you knew what you needed. You know,
Yes, absolutely.
to allow yourself to be guided by that.
Thank you. Even though I was guided by that, it was still terrifying. I mean, I was guided every step of the way, told exactly what was going on, but it still got to the point where the terror was beyond what I could deal with alone.
Yeah. Yes, integration looks different for everyone. But thanks for sharing your journey.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Christine, let's hear from you about your STE and your integration process.
Okay. Well, basically, if you took Michael's and Elizabeth's and went like this, that would be mine in so many ways. Michael was talking about feeling symptomatic prior to his experience, and that is exactly what happened to me. I was in grad school, and I just moved to Canada with my brand new husband. We'd just gotten married, and I was a hard worker. I was used to working hard. I was used to being kind of involved in what I was doing, focusing. But as I was kind of getting into grad school, into the thick of it, I started to feel really odd, like I was lifting up out of my body. I started having trouble with, I've always been like a spelling bee kind of person, and I couldn't spell simple words. Like I'd be trying to write cinnamon or on potato on a grocery list, and it was suddenly like I was starting to just lose my facility with language, which was terrifying because I was in the middle of grad school and, heading for my defense. And everybody's, oh, you're in grad school, of course, you're feeling weird. And I'm like, I don't know, like I've been in my body like 45 years now, and I have never felt like this in my life. So I just had a number of, like you were talking, Elizabeth, about somatic experiences. I think it was Elizabeth. Anyway, I started having weird feelings too, like I'd suddenly dropped like 100 stories in an elevator in an instant, or just these really weird experiences. And so I, drank a bunch of teas that are supposed to help you with your brain, and, really focused, trying to pull myself together to for my defense in grad school. And I went through the defense, and I successfully defended, and I got my degree. And then I thought, well, I'll just, spend some time in the garden and, walk the dogs and hang out all summer, and I'll feel better. But I actually started feeling weirder and weirder and weirder. And more, it felt like I was just lifting out, like I was going to leave my body out of the top of my head. And Elizabeth, you were talking about the top of your head. I just remember having that sense, like I need to hold it in, like I need to stay in my body. And I'd be driving, and I'd feel like 95% of me just wanted to go, and 5% of me is like, no, you have to stay here, like white knuckling my way into remaining in the body. And so I went to visit some friends in Oregon who are in that time were in their 70s, and they'd been doing spiritual stuff, since the 70s. So they were really well versed in these kinds of things. And I wasn't doing any yoga. I wasn't doing anything like that. So I went to visit them on the train. And when I got off the train at the station in Eugene, I felt like I was still on the train. Like the train was going on without my body, but I felt like I was still there. And then I was in the station with them. And, I was starting to really fracture and feeling like I was in multiple places at once, or maybe not even multiple places, but like I was huge, and I was like not contained in my body. It's really, really hard to describe unless you've had that experience. So anyway, I sat with them in the station, and we had a coffee, And I was trying to explain to them what I was feeling and about how I kept feeling like I needed to hold myself in. And my friend Ron, who was at that time, I said in his 70s, and very wise, said, "Why are you trying to hold yourself in?" And I was like, "Well, because I don't know what else to do." And he said, "Well, have you ever thought about just letting go when that happens?" And I was like, no, that never crossed my mind. So he said, "Well, why don't you try that next time you get that really strong feeling?" So I said, "Okay, why not?" So I started feeling weirder and weirder and weirder. And I came back home and was kind of floating through my life, but I didn't have that feeling like I was really going to separate until I was at an art gallery opening. And the art gallery happened to be called Mysteria. And I was there looking at some paintings by a local artist. And there were people milling around, and I was feeling so disconnected. And somebody came up and was talking to me, and she asked me a question. And then I thought, oh my God, I don't think I have words. Like, I don't think I remember how to talk. And I was looking into her eyes, and she's nodding like I'm saying stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I saying? Like, I don't even know where I am or what's happening with me. And somebody got her attention, and she turned away, and I was like, thank God that's over. And I turned and I looked at this painting of a jackrabbit, and I was looking at it, and then the jackrabbit started to move, and its body started shimmering and shaking. And then I felt that urge to go out of the top of my head, and I'm like, okay, let's go. And I thought I was dying. Like, literally, I was like, I guess this is it. I guess I'm leaving my body now. So I guess I'm dying, and that's fine, right? So I went up, and I looked down on the crowd from above, and I remember seeing a bald guy, like his bald, shiny head, and this is like this really strong mnemonic memory I have, walking through the crowd below me. But at the same exact time, and I can't describe it really, but I could see him out of my own eyes coming towards me at the exact same time, two perspectives. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I didn't die. Can I walk? Can I get out of this crowd and outside? Because I felt like I needed to get out. So I got outside and I sat down, and I thought, am I having a stroke? Am I sick? Do I have an aneurysm? You know, is there something wrong in my brain? Do I need to go to the hospital? And I looked at my cell phone, and I'm like, I know I can use this to get help, but I can't remember how. This is a device for help, but I didn't know what to do. So anyway, some people came out, and they're like, what's going on? And I guess I didn't look very normal. I had tears streaming out of my eyes. My mouth was kind of drooping. I was going, and they said, you know, they got more people out, and pretty soon I was just surrounded by a group of people, and they were like, lie down. Do you want some cold water? Do you want a towel? Do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want to go to the hospital? And everybody was just crowding around me, and I was like, I couldn't say anything. And I was trying to say, I'm fine, but I couldn't get a word out. And so they got an ambulance, and they threw me in the back of the ambulance, and they sent me off to emergency. And so the paramedic was in the back with me, and he's like, all right, what did you take? And I was like I didn't even know what he meant. He's like, what drugs are you on? We can't help you unless we know what drugs you're on. And I was like, how do I say this? Like, I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't, you know, I'm not on anything. Pharmaceuticals, nothing. And then I realized, so I use sign language. And I realized maybe I can sign. And so I started signing. I was like, oh yeah, I can sign. Like, I have access to sign language. It must be in a different part of my brain than what the part that's affected. So I signed to him, you know, I don't do drugs, I don't drink. And he's like, he yells to the driver, oh, she's deaf. And then he goes, we don't understand sign language. And I'm like, oh my God. So anyway, I get to the hospital, and they did a bunch of tests. They did brain scans, they did EEGs, they did heart tests, they did blood tests, they did, you know, every kind of test you would do, I guess, if somebody came in. And they left me languishing there in ER until the morning, and they came in and said, well, everything's clear, you can go. So I was like, okay, I guess I don't have, you know, I mean, had a CT of my brain and everything. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm fine. And I was walking out of the hospital, and I had that timelessness that you were sort of talking about, I think, Elizabeth, a little bit, that sense of just eternity all in a moment. And I remember this woman, older woman, lying on a gurney in the hall. She looked really like she was in her last days. And I made eye contact with her, and there was this moment where our souls just kind of like mingled together, and I've never felt anything like that with a stranger. And it took forever. Anyway, had a couple more experiences like that on my way out of the hospital. And then I opened the door of the hospital and I looked out into this unbelievable glittering world of molecules, every molecule sparkling in the air, and all the space between, all the negative space between branches and my fingers, and everything was alive and sparkling. And I saw everything moving in and out of everything else. And I realized that the veil was gone, and I was seeing energy. Well, I didn't realize that at the time, but I think that's what it was. And I went, oh my God, like, how do you live in this beauty? Like, how do you even function in this intensity? And I realized I couldn't even look at it. It was too amazing. And so I had to look at my feet and just watch my feet. And even the dapples in the sidewalk were like pulsing, and everything was just, it was just incredible. Anyway, I had no language for some time. And my husband thought I was like having an affair. Like, he didn't understand what was happening with me. I lost all kinds of weight. I finally had to leave my marriage and go sleep on a friend's couch. And I was really lucky because I had people in my life who kind of appeared. Like you said, Elizabeth, people just kind of showed up. You know, somebody said, well, I have a couch, you can sleep here, you don't have to pay rent. Somebody else said, I'll be your left brain, you know, and help you get your things done that you need to do. Make sure you follow through, get that check cashed or whatever, or deposited. And I saw a bunch of doctors. You know, I had these kind of follow-up visits to neurologists and things like that after my night in emergency. And everything came back absolutely clear. And by the time everything came back clear, I was in this state of absolute, complete bliss. And maybe it's kind of like what you're talking about, the heaven state, Elizabeth, kind of just everything was absolutely stunningly beautiful. Everyone I met I was in love with in a way that I'd never felt in my life. I could not sleep. I could barely eat. I couldn't eat meat. I couldn't eat anything from animals. I was very, my diet went down to tiny meals of vegetables. And all I could think of was getting on my bicycle and riding. And I rode through the city at night with headphones on, which isn't super safe, but in this little Canadian town, it was okay. And I'd ride around the lake, and I'd see muskrats, and I'd see foxes, and I'd see animals doing crazy things in the night. And it was like the whole way I thought the world was completely lifted, and there was this whole other world that was existing. And I mean, muskrats everything was still vibrating. So, you know, the muskrats would be like multicolored, like animated almost. Everything was just stunning. But I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't care, because I was not having terror, I was not having pain, I was not having fear, and because there were enough people that kind of showed up to hold me and hold space for me, and during those, especially those first 3 months, that I was really, really out there. And then you had your life-saving book, Michael. I had my life-saving book. I was in our local hippie store here, our Crystal store, with a friend, and that's got a used book section. And so I'm kind of like wandering around, and then it was like I just looked at, my eyes were drawn to the cover of this book that was lying. It wasn't, it wasn't side by side the other books. It was lying down so I could read it. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough. And it said, "Spiritual emergency when personal transformation becomes a crisis," like in these giant letters. And I'm like, that kind of sounds like I should read that book. And I picked it up and started, it was by Groff, Stefan and Christina Groff. And I was like, oh, this is what's happening. And so I bought the book and read it cover to cover. And if you guys don't know it, it was published in the 80s, and it's got a lot of different articles and contributions from different writers and gurus and thinkers. And it just gave me the answer for what was happening to me. And then I started to recognize, oh yeah, that energy. Oh yeah, that Kundalini, that kind of sounds like my thing. And, and all, all these different descriptions of different kinds of spiritual emergencies was relating to my experience. In the meantime, I had seen some doctors. I'd seen, a bunch of not mental health practitioners, but medical doctors. Like you said, Michael, that same kind of thing. And I had a cupboard full of prescription medication. And I didn't take a single pill because I had the sense that if there's nothing wrong with me, nothing's showing up on tests, you've seen me once for 5 minutes and you're going to give me medication for bipolar disorder? Like, on what are you basing this? And it was not like a single pill a day. It was like, take 2 today, take 3 tomorrow, take 5 by the end of the week. Within 2 weeks, you'll be taking 10 a day. It was like, why are you giving me this? So I didn't take any because by that time I was in a state of such absolute bliss that I never wanted to come back. Like I never wanted to be who I was before. So I spent time in nature. I spent time on my bicycle. I don't know how I made a living during those days. I think somehow I was doing something that because I never ran out of money. But my marriage ended. My husband and I had lunch and he looked at me and he said, you look like my wife, but you're not my wife. My wife is dead and I'm in grief mourning for my wife. And I don't love you. I love my wife who's dead. And it was this really weird experience because I felt the same way. Because it wasn't long before that I had realized I was dead. I had died and I was in the afterlife. Like it was that extreme. Because the world never looked so great before. There was never so much love before. So everything changed. Everything ended. And it took about 5 years for me. It was 3 months where I was really in that intense, multicolored, animated world of like a hallucinogenic experience of love and the cosmos and timelessness and no space and understanding things like if I step in front of a speeding bus, nothing's really going to change. There's just going to be like a swirling of energy and everything will go on as before. Now this sounds insane, but I still understand that perspective. So after that intense 3 months, then there were several years where language started to come back. I was sort of functioning at about 80% of my cognitive abilities. I was able to kind of go back to work, although I knew I wasn't as good as I used to be at drawing and, writing and things like that, but I could get by. And I still had that perspective, like the sparkling kind of went down. I started to see the real shapes and the real forms of the world again. But I still had the perspective and the understanding that this is all a construct, like I really still felt, I knew the veil is just a veil. And at the end of that 5 years, that's when my orbit really started to decay. So I'm out in space and like I got, catapulted out into space and had those glorious 3 months. And then I kind of went into orbit out there. And then my orbit started decaying. And then I realized I had to come back and be a human again. And it was the worst feeling. Like for me, that was the worst part, is watching myself fall back down into the human world and realizing that no one in my environment has that perspective. And they're all acting like identity and ego and, insults and, self-preservation and making sure nobody hurts my feelings and, disrespects me. Like that's all real stuff. And to me, that was so painful because it's like you just want to shake people and say, don't you understand that is, you're wasting your life worrying about these things. Let that all go. It's not real. And you can't talk to people like that. You just can't start talking to people like that, especially where I am in this little agricultural city and on the prairies in Canada. So I had to learn to just be quiet and not talk about my experience and not try to get other people there, where I am. So what really integration for me has taken a really long time, because this all started in 2010, Michael, when yours did. So it's 9 years now that I've been, since I first was catapulted out of the top of my head. And just in the last maybe 6 months, I've found a key to being able to work as a human being with other people. And it really just has 100% to do with that first moment of looking at that woman in the hospital and that feeling of connection and love, and searching for that in everyone that I come in contact with. And when someone comes at me with a lot of upset, just turning, instead of going, don't you understand, you're wasting your time with this stuff, or defending myself, which is long, like that's really historical. I don't ever have that urge. That's not my first urge now. But to turn it around and just feel that sense of love with that person, it really brings everything down into a place I can manage. Before that, I couldn't manage it. I could not manage upset when people came into my environment upset, either at me or in a situation or anything. I would just, like, I was paralyzed. But finding a space of love or compassion to just kind of be open to it in a way, it's hard to explain because it's kind of new for me. I don't really have words for it. But that's how I've started to integrate. And in my work as an art therapist, my psychological work and my healing work, I'm not working with people who, at least right now, who are having these kinds of issues or spiritual emergency issues, but I'm finding that my own experience and finding this place of really empathy or compassion that's really honest and rich allows me to work with people where they are really at. You know, if people are having identity issues or they're struggling with their girlfriend or whatever, like these deaf kids that I'm working with have a lot of teenager issues that are so meaningless to me in my life, but I can find a way to work with them through this new place that I've arrived at, if that makes any sense. I think that answers all your questions, maybe?
Yeah, Christine, that's fascinating, and thank you. Yeah, again, that journey of integration, it looks so different for everyone, and it seems like so often it's something you have to learn as you go along. Like, there's not anybody external that can necessarily tell you. It's about trusting the inner wisdom as it arises, and you know, just learning as you go through it. So thanks for sharing all of that. Okay, so we have a few more questions, and we're gonna turn it back to Elizabeth to ask the next question.
Hi, everyone. Wow, your experiences are the perfect representation of what we mean when we say spiritually transformative experience. Like Katrina said, everybody's experience is very different. Sometimes they have very unique, or they have very qualities that are common, and then very unique qualities. It never happens the same way, exact way, for any two people. There is a question that I'm very curious about, and that is, how have your world views and your values changed from prior to your experience to what they are now after your experience? We're running a little short on time, so if you could each just take 3 minutes I know it's a very big question, but if you could share with the audience today, what do you think the most significant changes in your world view and in your values has been? Michael, would you like to start?
Sure. So to keep it somewhat simple, I think, actually, I've learned this the hard way. So I'd say prior, it was really about me, right? Me and what I needed and what I wanted. And I think that's fine. I think as individuals, if we've had some injuries, I think that there is a time where it has to be about you and it has to be about me in order to heal. What a spiritual awakening has taught me, though, is that a lot of the healing process also has to do with interacting with others and giving back to others and helping to heal them. So, you know, for instance, I know that since and even prior to the Kundalini awakening, I still feel massive amounts of energy throughout my body, and it can be felt as heat, and I mean, you literally feel it on yourself. I remember coming across this quote, which was just perfect for me, and the quote was, "Serve or suffer." And you know, if you don't use the energy that you now have, whatever this amped up energy is that has come into your being, if you don't use it, it doesn't feel too good. Just keeping it on you. So I've learned that the more you use the energy to serve others, actually, the better you feel. And when you're not utilizing that energy, essentially, it just sits with you stagnating, and it doesn't feel good. So I think that would be the biggest thing, just directing energy outwards rather than trying to directing it inwards, or just maintaining a stagnant state. So really, serve or suffer was a big quote for me that was helpful. That's about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I love that. Serve or suffer. I think that's very common, actually, from my work with experiencers that have been given. There's that broader context. It's not just me and inward, it's all and outward now. Thank you so much. That was beautifully put.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Elizabeth, would you like to share with us today what has changed for you?
Thank you. Yes, Elizabeth, you said it really well. It's not even really a choice after the experience. I can't say that my worldview has particularly changed, because all my life I was truly an idealist at heart. In my heart, the world didn't make sense to me, and that's why I struggled with it so much. I was very sensitive to a lot of things. And so my worldview hasn't changed, although my understanding of it has been so expanded. Like looking at the way a 2-year-old would view the world compared to a 30-year-old is a huge difference. So because of the experience, because of seeing the other side, past lives, having so much more information, such a different view, like Christine was talking about, with the energy and everything being alive and the connection and the beauty and the purpose in it, that it's a good purpose, gives me just such a completely different understanding of it all, which gives me a new point to connect with it. I didn't know how to connect with the world before, so it was always like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Something must be wrong with me, because other people seem to function here. So as I found new points to connect through service and accepting people the way they are, and understanding that that's good, that it's not bad, their behaviors, their desires, all of our humanness is, in my opinion, an entirely intelligent system of its own, and it is good. And yeah, if you can get out of that defensive stance and allow the space for others to just be themselves, I have found to be very rare, and people really need that time to just be that space, to just go through whatever they're going through, whatever they care about, whatever they're upset about. So it's like my skill set and my viewpoint has changed more than my worldview.
Your purpose has changed.
Yes, that too, ma'am. Yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was given a specific purpose at the end of each experience. I was given a final instruction at the end of each experience and told what to do with each one.
Mm-hmm. And was that like generally easy for you? Was it difficult for you? Or were you just able to like?
The first two were very easy. The second one took a lot of integration and the relearning. But with the instruction that I was given, and even after my third experience ended, I was still given moment by moment instruction for months, and it just faded more and more as it became more of a part of my own functioning system.
All right. Very interesting. Thanks, Elizabeth. Christina, could you share with us what changed for you?
You asked about worldviews and values.
Yes.
I think those are kind of together for me. Before all of this, I was a pretty active political activist. I was the one that got all my friends together to go down to the marches, and I did a lot of political art, political theater, and I was angry, and I thought everybody on the other team was an idiot and mean and making bad decisions, and I was caught up in the binary, I guess is the easiest way to put it, of politics, and full of outrage and fight. I had a lot of fight in me and wanted to fix everything. And that's all completely fallen away. I recognize that politics are still really binary, but I see it from, as awful as it gets sometimes, I see what's happening politically right now as really, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like it's not real. Before it was really real for me, and it was really urgent to fix everything that was wrong with any political thing. But as I've kind of lost my grip on my own identity, what I see is really a battle of little tin soldiers that are really just these fake identities that people have made to represent themselves, marching around and having, little battles. And I'm just not, I can't pretend that's real anymore. It just doesn't strike me as real. So before, I was really about fighting, and now it's way more about connecting. Like, I just feel my worldview is like, I feel a network, that not only am I one little molecule in a big network, but I'm also the whole network of not only humans, but squirrels and leaves and stars. Like, I'm part of the whole thing. And so that tiny little condensed worldview that had to do with politics is just gone. It's like a tiny little shell that I exploded out of. And so my whole way of operating is through this other thing that we don't really have words for, but it's kind of like compassion, love, connection, empathy. So it's completely different, but I almost can't describe it. Does that sort of answer your question?
It does. It does exactly, and demonstrates very well sometimes the very dramatic shifts that people make because of their experiences. And your description is pretty common for, I know, some of the people that I've worked with as well. You're not the only one who has that same perspective. Yeah, yeah, it's common for people that have had experiences. Thank you all so much. We do have some questions that have come in from the audience. There was a comment earlier that all three of you are like a description of modern day shamans, and that hospitals should have shamans in them in the emergency rooms, right? Because the shaman would know exactly what was happening and know how to connect with somebody who was brought in. So I thought that was a very interesting perspective from one of our viewers today. We do have a question. somebody has asked, can one have Kundalini experiences that are more subtle and less defined than what has been shared here today? And I know from my own perspective that yes, they can be. And although, Michael, I know that you've read the Gopi Krishna book, and maybe you can share some of his wisdom about that, just very briefly.
Sure, but I think even today's panel shows you that, for instance, you know, all three panelists have had a Kundalini experience, and they all differed in a sense. They were all different. So they could definitely differ. I mean, my understanding of the Kundalini energy is it's very much associated with you know, the energy that's, let's say, felt at the base of your spine, but that's going to be felt throughout your body because it's the nervous system. So your spine essentially is connected to everything in your body. I find it closely associated with the chakras. You know, I had read about them, but you know, I can feel my chakras throughout my body, not all the time, but when they're doing their thing, yes. So yeah, I definitely feel that there are subtle and different experiences from full blown. You know, for instance, Gopi Krishna. I think similar to Christine. You know, he describes his Kundalini awakening, and not to scare anybody, but his was instantaneous. So I think maybe this is a better answer to the question, is that although rare, there are individuals who have spontaneous Kundalini awakenings. So from out of nowhere, literally the heat shoots up their spine from the base of their spine, out of the top of their head. They feel like lava is flowing out of their head, and it's spontaneous. And others, it's a lot more of a subtle experience, and it's a lot more slower. That being said, in my experience, it's often better for it to be a little bit slower, because ultimately the Kundalini awakening is a purging process. It's a cleansing process. So if it happens spontaneously all at once, like what was depicted in Gopi Krishna's book, and it sounds like Christine experienced similar. It was a similar experience. You know, if it happens all at once, you could be exposed to, yes, a blissful experience all at once, but you can also be exposed to a lot of fear and terror. And Gopi Krishna talks about, you know, he was incapacitated for a very long period of time. He was lucky to have a wife who helped him through, who fed him. You know, I think he had to eat soup for weeks, and he couldn't feed himself. He couldn't move. He couldn't walk until his body integrated the process. So a spontaneous awakening, it's everything happens fast, meaning the good and the bad and the ugly. Whereas if it's slower, if it's more of a slower progression, again, you'll experience some of the good and you know, quote unquote bad, because it's all good ultimately, but you experience it in a way that you can absorb it. Hopefully, you can assimilate the experience better. So yes, I mean, it's completely different, and it's completely unique for every individual. I'd say the biggest differences, for the sake of this conversation, is just that the speed I've seen at which can happen. Sometimes spontaneous and sometimes gradual. Hopefully that helped.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
So we have another question that has come in. What do you think the purpose was for you to have your experience? Let's kind of go around and ask everybody, and just take 3 minutes, and that will be our last question, I think. Elizabeth, what do you think the purpose of your experience was?
When it was happening, the magnitude of the information coming in, I was absolutely convinced that there was no way this was not for the entire world. But as I grounded eventually and began to process the experience, I found it amazingly to be primarily for myself, but I began to understand how I am the entire universe, as Christine was explaining. So it's not that I'm so great that I needed all this. Actually, it was kind of the opposite, that I was so underdeveloped that I needed this much help to just get to what I consider being an authentic human being, who I was meant to be. But then at the same time, it is ultimately for everyone, because I have transformed so much, because every single thing that I do is completely different now. And I don't mean that I dress completely different or I live a completely different lifestyle. I mean the way that I do everything with intentional purpose, everything as it is just as important as the next. And I see everything, and I see every life and every squirrel and leaf and person as just important as the next. So it was absolutely 100% for me, but it was absolutely 100% for every single molecule that I touch and will ever touch forever, and has made a tremendous impact on myself, my family, and anybody that I know, and not even that I'm intentionally trying to impact anyone or influence anyone with it, just because I've changed so much. I think it's offered other people a sense of how a lifestyle can look and how a person can maintain and enjoy and become and connect, I think, in ways that a lot of people don't get to see, that I never got to see before this.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's beautiful. Christine, what do you think the purpose of your experience is?
It's a strange question. Since I saw it come up, I've been wondering how I would answer it. And this might be a little bit controversial, but I feel like these kinds of experiences that we've all described here and that countless people have had throughout history are actually a really natural part of human experience. And if our Western culture was a little bit more aware of and supportive of these kinds of experiences, a lot more people would probably have them. It's like for me, what I think is, it's as natural as adolescence. It's a stage of our development that ideally everybody gets a taste of on some level. But I feel that there's a lot of there's a lack of understanding of these experiences, and there's a lot of fear around them. And you know, we're so quick to talk about mental health and diagnose people as being sick for any kind of variation from the straight and narrow, or from what we consider sanity or normal behavior, and medicate them, or, you know, explain to them that they're sick, or, you know, kind of put these labels on them that define them as victims of an illness, rather than as a person who's having a, you know, maybe at times not particularly comfortable, but a very essential experience. Just like adolescence is hell, right? But we all have to go through it in order to kind of get to the next phase of our lives. And one of the beautiful quotes that I heard recently was from George Atwood, who's a psychologist, retired now, I think, almost. And he said, you know, he talks about so-called psychosis, And he thinks it's not actually an illness that's living inside of a person, but actually an experience that a person is having. And to me, that kind of shift of the perspective of so-called psychosis, or what we're calling, you know, in this case, spiritually transformative experiences, is really necessary. And I believe that it is, in terms of the purpose of it, I think it's for, yes, us as individuals to grow, but everyone that I've ever met that's gone through this without stopping it through medication or just quashing it or trying to clamp down on it or, you know, cut it off, ends up contributing, like the other panelists here and Katrina and everybody that, you know, that I've talked to that has been through it, contributes, serves, as Michael was saying. So the purpose is, purpose is a hard word to incorporate in what I'm talking about, but it's definitely for the personal, and it's very natural. So what's the purpose of adolescence? I guess to get to the next level and to be a better contributor. So I think it's kind of the same in a way. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I love that, Christina. I agree. It's developmental. Yeah, exactly. Michael, what do you think the purpose of your experience has been?
You know, for myself, it's definitely been a healing process. It has definitely helped me heal, or accelerated the healing process. But I think a big part of my story is really not having been able to find any help. I think that's a big part of my story. Just really having been alone with my experience, how difficult that made it, not knowing what was going on, being scared, really not having any support at the time, and, you know, trying to find help, but again, being met, like what Christine was saying, with the medical model that's not open to spiritual experiences. And so I think that for me was made the process very difficult. And I often wondered, okay, you know, why do I have to go through this on my own? And I guess on the other end, it was just to gain a better experience, to gain a better understanding of the experience, to kind of figure it out myself. And now that have a good grasp of the experience, to help on the other end. So not having been able to find the help at the time, I find myself now as a social worker, and a doctoral candidate. I'm doing research, and I've decided to do my research on spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. And I ask, well, you know, as a social worker, am I going to do this research? And yeah, sure, because I guess it's my job to educate social workers about these experiences, so that when someone like myself, who needs help, goes and tries to find it, I'm hoping that in the near future, we will have just more access to helping professionals. And I think it's important for the professionals to be, for the helpers to be professionals. That's on another tangent, you know. Because there's a lot of helpers out there on the internet, and it could get a little shady on the internet. So I think it's important for the helpers to be ethical, to be professional, to value the client, to meet the clients where they are at. And I hope to educate social workers on how to deal with spiritual emergence. I'm grateful to have found Assist, and I'm grateful the organization exists. I wish I would have stumbled, or I don't know, were you around in 2010?
Michael, I wish I would have found them in 2010 myself.
Right. So that, I mean, I think that's what it's about. I think so. Maybe it's the right time, and you know, hopefully in the future, people who are struggling with spiritual emergence, they won't struggle so much, because a big part of the struggle is just being scared. You don't know what's going on, and once you have a supportive environment and people who share, it makes it a little less scary. So I think my purpose is to provide the support that I didn't receive when I needed it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Michael.
You're welcome.
There's another good question coming in, but unfortunately we are just about to end the broadcast here, and I'm going to turn it over to Katrina. But I just want to thank everyone for participating today. And I could talk to you guys for another 2 hours and just get all these questions answered. But unfortunately, I know we have to end the broadcast soon. All right. Thank you. Katrina?
Yeah, thank all of you for being with us today and for sharing yourselves and your truth. I think it's absolutely necessary at this point in time that people have a place to turn to, and you know, the value is in the honest truth that you share with us. It's one thing to read it in a textbook for people who haven't been through the experience. It's another to hear it directly from the experiencer. So I think this is great. I think together we're all building bridges here, and excited to have each of you taking the time to be with us today. And thanks again to everyone who's watching live and for your thoughtful questions. I wish we did have more time to talk about this today, but we have to let people get on with their days as promised. And there will be many opportunities to have these conversations. And our next community conversation is scheduled for February 21st at noon Eastern. And we're going to be focusing on meditation-related STEs. So if you're interested, keep an eye out for links on that. You can go to our ASSIST Facebook page and our website, aciste.org. And we'll send some more information out once we get the link established for that on February 21st. And I also want to make you aware that our conference is coming up in November. We've just about finalized things with that, and that's going to be in Atlanta. We are currently looking for people to submit their proposals to present. So if you're interested, if you are a researcher or a therapist, we'll be talking about therapeutic ways to address these spiritually transformative experiences with your clients. And again, it's really our goal to promote cultural competency among the helping professionals. So coaches, spiritual directors, therapists, you know, check us out, get involved, and keep in touch. It's been really great to hear from all of you today, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you.
Our website is assist.org. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day.